What's the difference between working at a Big Four versus working at an MBB firm? You'll find out by the end of this video. I get a lot of questions from candidates who are thinking about applying to an MBB or a Big Four, or they got multiple offers between the Big Fours and MBB, and they're trying to decide which offer should they take. Well, both experiences are going to give you a completely different career. But before we talk about the key differences, let's actually talk about what each of these terms mean. What does MBB mean? What does Big Four mean? We'll start with MBB. MBB is an acronym for McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and Bain. They get to share this special acronym because they are often considered the most prestigious of the strategy consulting firms. So when consulting firms are competing for business, they're often going to be competing against these big three companies. It doesn't mean that other consulting firms aren't prestigious. It just means that these are the three names that come up most often. Let's talk about each of the MBBs. First is McKinsey. So McKinsey is the oldest of the big three, being founded in 1926. Today, McKinsey has over 130 offices across more than 65 countries. Next comes Boston Consulting Group. BCG was founded almost 40 years after McKinsey in 1963 and became a key competitor right away for McKinsey. What made BCG skyrocket to a prestigious firm is that they developed a lot of the thought leadership that's still being used today in the consulting world. So a lot of the frameworks, a lot of the models, a lot of the terms came from BCG. So they're often known and continue to be known as a thought leader when it comes to the consulting space. The third and the youngest of the big three is Bain & Company, which actually was founded by former employees and partners at BCG who spun off to create their own firm, Bain & Company. And what made Bain & Company stand out from BCG and McKinsey is that they were the first firm to really put their success into client success. What that means is that initially, Bain would actually model their fees against the success that the client would see. So the only way that Bain would get paid more is when the client makes more money. So it became a win-win. Today, this is more standard across all consulting firms, but at the time, putting results instead of reports was what made Bain stand out. Next, we have the Big Four, which are made up of 4 companies that not only do consulting, but also do tax services and audits. And in fact, they started off doing taxes and auditing, but eventually opened up their own strategy consulting arm and continues to buy other companies over. The firms that make up the Big Four include Deloitte, which is the oldest, being founded in 1845, has the most revenue and the most employee counts worldwide. Next is 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗏, also known as PwC. Then you have Ernst & Young, also known as EY. Finally, you have KPMG, which came as the merger of multiple firms, as well as the smallest of the Big Four. So now you know the firms that make up MBB and the Big Four. Let's go over some of the most common questions that I get asked when it comes to people who are deciding if they should apply to Big Four or MBB, or if they have an offer, which one should they take? The first question is about size. Which one's actually bigger? Well, even though MBB is known for the 3 most prestigious consulting firms, their total revenue is actually smaller. In fact, if you combine the revenues of McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, it's still almost less than half of what Deloitte by itself brings in. So as a result, there are less employees and less offices and less global reach when it comes to the MBBs compared to the Big Four. The Big Four together are almost 10 times as big in terms of employee count as well as global presence. That's because Big Four not only does consulting, but they also have other professional services such as tax preparation and audit. In fact, the Big Four is so big that it's estimated that 80% of the largest companies in the world work with at least one of the Big Four. So if it comes to size, it's easy to see that the Big Four have a huge advantage here. The second question I get asked is, what do the consultants actually do, and does the work differ? While it varies between project to project, on average at MBB, you're going to expect more strategic high-level projects that will last on average 2 to 3 months. Again, there are projects who last for years and ones that last for weeks. But on average at MBB, you're going to be put in projects for about 2 to 3 months and working on strategy projects. While at the Big Four, a lot of the projects are also implementation-based and can last 6 or more months. One thing you often see, for example, is that a company will bring in MBB to do some of the strategy work. For example, let's say which country should they launch a new product, and then once that country has been decided, they'll hire a Big Four to come in and actually build out the infrastructure. For example, the sales force, the offices, the supply chain logistics, and so forth. So here, if you're trying to optimize for a number of projects in different industries and high-level projects, the MBB have, on average, an edge over the Big Four. The third question I get asked is, which one has a better work-life balance? In consulting, it's going to depend on the project and the team. For example, if you have a project that's due in a few weeks and you have a small team but a lot of work to do, you're going to be putting in a lot more hours than if you have a big team with a very defined scope that the firm has worked on over and over again. But on average, you can expect that MBB to be working between 50 to 60 hours per week on average. So it really depends on the project. So for example, when I was at Bain, if I was working with a local school system or a nonprofit like the Nature Conservancy, my hours were much less than when I was working with a private equity firm or a hedge fund, which you would oftentimes see in the 70s and once even 80s range. But both are atypical. For the nonprofits, I was often working about 45 to 50 hours a week. But for the hedge funds and private equity firms, there were weeks when I was above 70. When it averaged out, it worked out to be that 50 to 60 that I mentioned. The Big Four, on the other hand, because the projects are longer and oftentimes have been done over and over again in a similar fashion, the work hours are a lot less. So at Big Four, you might see an average about 45 to 50 hours a week. So over the long term, the Big Four will give you a better work-life balance. But again, it varies depending on the project you get. And by the way, if you're thinking about applying for any of these firms, I actually want to help you. If you comment below the name of the firm that you're applying to, I'll send you some special resources for how to get the interviews and pass interviews at these firms. So for example, if you're interested in applying to Bain, all you have to do is put Bain in the comments and I will give you some Bain resources. The fourth question I get asked is, what's the travel life like? And the answer to this actually varies. Between the MBBs, they each have what is called a different staffing model, which is when you're a consultant, how do you get put on projects? At McKinsey, they have something what's called a global staffing model. That means that if you're working in the Atlanta office, your project might still be in Copenhagen, so you're going to be expected to travel. On the opposite is Bain, which has what's called a local staffing model, which means that you're going to travel, but not much. When I was up for staffing at Bain, almost all the projects that they require travel would be just a 3-hour flight. And most of them were less than a 3-hour flight. So when I did travel, I would literally fly down for a couple days and then fly back up. So that's the local staffing model. So about 90% of the time, I actually stayed in the office. And then BCG is right in the middle. They have what's called a regional staffing model, which means that you're going to travel a lot more than Bain, but not as far as McKinsey on average. So when it comes to travel for an MBB, it really depends on what firm. And again, even if you're at Bain, you can still offer all the travel projects. And if you're at McKinsey, you can still try to fight your way through all the local projects as well. And for the Big Four, on average, you're going to expect less travel than McKinsey and BCG, but more travel than Bain. And in particular, Deloitte and PwC has the most travel among the Big Four. So in this regard, there's no clear difference between the two because it really comes down to the firm. So for example, if you are trying to travel, getting a firm like McKinsey, PwC, or Deloitte is going to make you travel more. But if travel is not your thing, you want to stay local, working at Bain, KPMG, EY might be a better bet for you. The fifth question I get asked is, which one pays more? I'll caveat this by saying that all the firms pay within the top 5% of earners worldwide. So getting a job at any of these firms, or even right out of college, you're already going to be making more than 95% of the world. So they pay really well. But if you are curious which one pays more, the answer is MBB. MBB pays about 20% more at all levels before the partner level. So for example, if you're an analyst coming in and you get an offer from, let's say, BCG and one from EY, you'll notice that BCG will pay more. So if compensation is something that you care about, MBB gets the point here. The sixth question I get asked is, which one will prepare me better for my long-term career? The answer to this depends on what you want to do with your career. If you look at all the alums that come from MBB to the Big Four, you'll notice that the career paths are almost endless. So you can see that the opportunities for working at these firms are going to be pretty amazing. But if you were just to look at the averages, here's what it says. MBB tends to produce more people in leadership roles, especially at the C-suites. So think your CEO, your COO, your CSO, your CFOs. So MBB tends to produce a lot more. For example, Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, came from McKinsey. Indra Nooyi, CEO of Pepsi, came from BCG. While John Donahoe, CEO of Nike, came from Bain. But when it comes to the Big Four, there's a lot more variety in the exit opportunities. So you can still be in a leadership role. For example, Orrin Smith, who worked at Deloitte, went on to become the CEO of Starbucks. For example, Phil Knight, the founder and first CEO of Nike, came from PwC. And EY is where Arthur Blank called home before he founded Home Depot and later became the owner of the Atlanta Falcons as well as Atlanta United. But that doesn't say that you have to go on a career path that is geared towards business. For example, Nate Silver, who worked at KPMG, ended up becoming a New York Times bestselling author. So there's a lot of possibilities that come from the exit opportunities that come from both MBB and the Big Four. So if you are trying to go into an executive level, MBB does have an edge here. But unless you're determined that you have to be the CEO of like a Fortune 500 company, both the Big Four and MBB will open opportunities for you. So there you have it. Now you know the differences between working at an MBB and working at a Big Four. And if you're 100% serious about becoming a management consulting at either an MBB or a Big Four or another amazing consulting firm, I would love to help you. Here at my consulting offer, my team and I are former recruiters, consultants, and interviewers at these Big Four and MBB firms. And we've helped over 700 people just like you start their career in management consulting. That means that 9 out of 10 people who work with us land at least one offer. All you have to do is click the link below, schedule a free call with my team, and be one step closer to landing your dream job at one of these firms. But if you are curious, do we really have a 90% success rate? Do most people we work with actually get multiple offers? Well, you don't have to take my word for it. Actually hear from James, who landed multiple MBB offers and Big Four offers. I'm going to share his video because I want you to hear from him how he decided between if he should work at a Big Four, an MBB, and what was that process for him landing multiple offers. All right, I'll see you in the next video, and I'll put James's video somewhere above my head.